The night was dark and stormy, the kind that made the ancient timber beams of Stifkey Manor groan under the weight of the wind. Inside, a young man named Geoffrey Boleyn sat by the fire, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. Little did he know that his actions on this fateful night would set in motion a chain of events that would change the course of English history. Geoffrey was born in 1405 in the small village of Sal, nestled between Aylsham and Reepham in Norfolk. His parents, Geoffrey and Alice, were parish gentry, living a modest but comfortable life. Young Geoffrey's early years were unremarkable, but his destiny lay far beyond the fields of Sal. At around the age of 15, Geoffrey was apprenticed to a hatter in the bustling city of London. This move marked the beginning of his rise. The hatter's trade was not glamorous, but it provided Geoffrey with a foothold in the city. His intelligence and ambition soon caught the attention of the Mercer's Company, one of the most prestigious livery companies in London. In 1436, Geoffrey transferred to the Mercer's Company, a move that would prove crucial in his ascent to power. By 1446, Geoffrey had become one of the aldermen for Castle Barnard Ward, and served as Sheriff of London. His success was not just a product of hard work, but also of strategic marriages. His first wife, Denise, had died by 1448, and he remarried Anne, the daughter and co-heir of Thomas, Lord Howe and Hastings. This union brought Geoffrey into the orbit of the aristocracy, a connection that would serve him well in the years to come. In 1457, Geoffrey reached the pinnacle of his career when he was elected Lord Mayor of London. He was knighted, and his reputation as a man of Yorkist sympathies grew. Despite the political turmoil of the time, Geoffrey managed to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics. He supported the Duke of York and his sons, and his loyalty was rewarded when Edward IV became king. Edward IV cultivated the loyalty of the City of London, and Geoffrey was a key figure in this alliance. Geoffrey's wealth and influence continued to grow. He purchased the manor of Blickling from Sir John Fastolf and built a grand house of brick, a symbol of his newfound status. His son, William, born in 1451, would inherit this legacy and build upon it. William, like his father, was a man of ambition. He married Margaret, the daughter of Thomas Butler, Earl of Ormond, a union that would further cement the Boleyn family's position in the upper echelons of society. William divided his time between Blickling and Hever Castle in Kent, managing his vast estates and serving on various commissions in Norfolk and Kent. The political landscape of England was always shifting, and William found himself in the service of Richard III, the Duke of Gloucester. He was knighted, a sign of his loyalty to the new king. However, the tide of fortune turned with the rise of Henry VII. William, despite his connections to the Howards, managed to navigate the new regime and was even appointed Sheriff of Kent in 1489. William's son, Thomas, continued the family's rise. He married Elizabeth Howard, daughter of Thomas Howard, Earl of Surrey, in about 1495. This marriage brought the Boleyns into the inner circle of one of the most powerful noble families in England. Thomas's career at court flourished, and he was soon appointed a squire of the body to the young King Henry VIII. Thomas and Elizabeth had 3 children, Mary, Anne, and George. These children would grow up in a world of privilege and opportunity, their lives shaped by the legacy of their ancestors. Mary, Anne, and George would go on to play significant roles in the tumultuous history of England, their names forever etched in the annals of the Tudor era. As the storm outside raged on, Geoffrey Boleyn's legacy continued to grow, a legacy that would shape the destiny of a nation. Thomas Boleyn's younger brother, James, was born in 1480. And like Thomas, who enjoyed a prominent and successful career, James lived a quieter and less eventful life. He received some legal training in his youth, and served on the Commission of the Peace for Norfolk from 1511 until his death in 1561. Despite being described as of Blickling, James lived there by courtesy of his brother, as he lacked significant lands of his own. Most of his successes were due to Thomas's patronage. James was knighted in 1520, though the reason is unclear. By 1533, he held the honorific position of Knight of the Body, which did not require regular attendance at court. In 1529, he represented Norfolk in the Reformation Parliament, and possibly again in 1536, though the records for the latter are incomplete. He survived the downfall of his niece, Anne Boleyn, and nephew, George Boleyn, in 1536, and the death of his brother in 1539. His lack of notable favor kept him safe from the family's enemies. In January 1540, James attended the reception of Anne of Cleves, the third wife of King Henry VIII, alongside the third Duke of Norfolk, his kinsman by marriage. The following month, he inherited his brother's lands in Norfolk, though he was not allowed to claim the earldom of Wiltshire. He exchanged Thomas's former lands in Kent for other properties in Norfolk, securing his local base and resolving his property issues. In 1542, James received a grant of Jane Rochford's movable property from the crown. Jane, the widow of James's nephew George, had been executed for her role in Queen Catherine Howard's infidelities. In 1546, he served on the jury that indicted his kinsman, Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, for high treason. From 1558 to 1560, James held the prestigious position of Custos Rotulorum for Norfolk. James lived to see his great-niece, Elizabeth I, ascend the throne in November 1558. When he died in 1561, he left various items to her in his will. Although there is no evidence of special favor from Elizabeth, his will was overseen by his kinsman, Henry Carey, Lord Hunsdon. James had married Elizabeth Wood of East Barsham, Norfolk, before 1520, but they had no surviving children. He was very old when he died, and with him, the direct male line of the Boleyns became extinct. Meanwhile, Thomas Boleyn's career at court flourished under King Henry VIII. His skill at the joust earned him the king's favor. He was knighted at Henry's coronation, and participated in the tournaments celebrating the birth of Prince Henry in January 1511. Thomas held various minor offices, indicating his close relationship with the king. He supported Henry's warlike ambitions, and used his excellent French to impress the king. Thomas served as Sheriff of Kent from 1510 to 1511, suggesting that Hever was his principal base. In 1512, he led a diplomatic mission to the court of Margaret of Austria, regent of the Low Countries. Henry was eager to fight France, and Thomas's mission was to secure Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor, as an ally. Despite initial setbacks, Thomas eventually secured the emperor's agreement, which came at a cost of 35,000 crowns to Henry. Thomas's mission also involved recruiting mercenaries for Henry's campaign in 1513. He developed a friendly relationship with Margaret of Austria, and was able to report the recruitment of 2,000 mercenaries. Upon his return, Thomas was released from debts owed to the late king, and paid for his ambassadorial expenses, indicating the king's favor. Henry was determined to redeem his honor after a series of military setbacks. In 1513, he led an army of 40,000 men into Hainault, and Sir Thomas Boleyn was among the 800 members of the king's household who accompanied him. This campaign was part of Henry's efforts to restore his prestige and secure his place in history. Sir Thomas Boleyn's role during the military campaigns and diplomatic negotiations of the early 16th century remains somewhat of a mystery. As a Knight of the Body, he was likely present during Henry VIII's campaigns, possibly acting as an interpreter between the English and Burgundian forces. However, his lack of recent military experience suggests he may not have had an active combat role. When Maximilian joined the siege of the Rouen in August 1513, he offered to serve under Henry in exchange for a significant payment. After the town's surrender, it was handed over to Maximilian and largely destroyed. Following this victory, Henry traveled to Lille to celebrate with his ally Margaret of Austria, and it is likely that Sir Thomas, being a friend of Margaret, accompanied him. During this time, Sir Thomas's younger daughter, Anne, was serving as a demoiselle d'honneur in Margaret's household. Anne's presence allowed her to be involved in the discussions that led to Henry's next target, Tournai. When Tournai surrendered in September, the citizens agreed to recognize Henry as King of France, a move that dampened Maximilian's ambitions. The town remained under English control for 5 years. Henry returned to England in October, and his household followed. Initially, he planned another campaign for 1514, but he soon changed his mind. The reasons for this shift are unclear, but it may have been due to doubts about his allies, the withdrawal of Ferdinand from the alliance, or the new Pope Leo X's desire for peace. By early 1514, Henry began to respond positively to the Pope's peace overtures, possibly due to the influence of Thomas Wolsey, who was rising in the royal favor. Wolsey, who had managed the logistics of the Tournai campaign, organized the peace negotiations, in which Sir Thomas did not participate, possibly because he was seen as a strong supporter of the war. Despite this, Sir Thomas received several marks of royal favor. In May 1514, he was granted 4 lordships in Norfolk, a profitable deal that strengthened his position as a landowner. His elder daughter, Mary, was chosen to accompany Henry's sister, Mary Tudor, to France for her marriage to Louis XII. This appointment was likely due to Sir Thomas's influence, as Mary herself did not have the character or abilities to qualify for such a prestigious role. Sir Thomas also managed to have his younger daughter, Anne, join the entourage, likely at the king's request. The Boleyn family's favor continued to grow. Sir Thomas and his wife, Elizabeth, participated in the Christmas revels in 1514, a clear sign of their high status. Tragically, Mary Tudor's reign as Queen of France was short-lived, as Louis XII died in January 1515. Mary Tudor quickly married Charles Brandon, the Duke of Suffolk, a move that caused tension with the king. Despite the controversy, the Boleyn girls remained in France, now serving the new queen consort, Claude. Sir Thomas's ability to secure these positions for his daughters suggests that he enjoyed significant favor at the French court. Wolsey's rise to power did not diminish Sir Thomas's influence, and he remained a leading member of the council. In February 1515, he was warned by Thomas spinally about a Spanish agent, Don Diego, who planned to visit opponents of Wolsey, including Sir Thomas. Despite this, Sir Thomas supported Wolsey's efforts to renew the peace with France in April 1515, a necessary move given the original treaty's expiration. Anglo-French relations continued to fluctuate, and Henry began to seek new allies, including the Swiss, who ultimately allied with Maximilian instead. Henry's desire for honor and his vision of himself as a European arbiter led him to support a general truce proposed by Pope Leo. Sir Thomas, as a council member, was aware of these developments but did not play a prominent role. In 1515, Sir Thomas was appointed to the Commission of the Peace for Norfolk and granted the constableship of Norwich Castle. He also sold the manor of Newhall to the crown and acted as a canopy bearer at the christening of Princess Mary. These gestures of favor were balanced by the ongoing legal battle over the inheritance of the Earl of Ormond, which involved Sir Thomas's mother, Margaret Boleyn. Sir Thomas used his influence to support his mother's claim, but the issue was not resolved until 1528. In 1516, Sir Thomas was involved in providing security for Margaret Tudor, who had fled to England after being imprisoned in Scotland. He was paid for his services and received other small favors, such as the cancellation of a debt and a license to export timber. He was also appointed Sheriff of Kent, a role that, despite its expenses, was a sign of his continued favor. By 1518, Sir Thomas recalled his elder daughter, Mary, from France due to concerns about her reputation. Despite her past behavior, he managed to secure her a place in Queen Catherine of Aragon's household, a delicate task given the strained relations between the king and queen. Sir Thomas's diplomatic skills were evident in this maneuver, as he navigated the complex court dynamics to secure a respectable position for his daughter. In the year 1518, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, who was both the Archbishop of York and the Lord Chancellor, achieved a significant diplomatic victory. Pope Leo X had called for a general truce across Europe in 1517, and his legates were tasked with promoting a crusade. Wolsey, who was already a powerful figure, insisted on equal status with the papal legate, Lorenzo Campeggio, and this negotiation took several weeks. When Campeggio finally arrived in England, his mission had been overshadowed by Wolsey's own plans. King Henry VIII, who supported the truce but had his own agenda, was determined to forge a new alliance with France. He proposed a marriage between his 2-year-old daughter, Mary, and the young Dauphin of France, Francis. This alliance would be part of a broader treaty, inviting all European princes to join a declaration of peace and reconciliation. The French king was easily persuaded, but Wolsey had to work hard to secure the agreement of Emperor Maximilian and the young King Charles of Spain. Despite their initial reluctance, both eventually agreed, and Wolsey's efforts brought most of the lesser European powers into the treaty as well. The success of this treaty boosted Henry's and Wolsey's reputations, and it cost the English exchequer less than a medium-sized military campaign. However, the treaty's success was fragile, and it was largely a statement of good intentions. The core of the treaty, the Anglo-French Agreement, was signed just 2 days later, and Sir Thomas Boleyn, a key figure in Henry's court, was among those who signed it. This treaty returned the city of Tournai to French control, and ensured that Anne Boleyn, Sir Thomas's daughter, would be safe at the French court. By January 1519, Sir Thomas was back in France, tasked with negotiating a meeting between the two kings. However, the death of Emperor Maximilian in February complicated matters. King Francis of France decided to enter the election for the Holy Roman Emperor, a move that could undermine the peace treaty. His main rival was Charles, the young King of Spain and Maximilian's grandson. Pope Leo X, concerned about the potential for conflict, sought a third candidate but eventually suggested that Henry VIII should run. Henry, encouraged by Wolsey, decided to enter the race, but it soon became clear that he was not a serious contender. Charles, with the support of the Fugger banking house, won the election, much to Francis's chagrin. Despite the election results, it was agreed that the meeting between the two kings would take place in the summer of 1520. Sir Thomas, who had done an excellent job maintaining amicable relations during the imperial election, was recalled to England in February 1520. He was then appointed to accompany Henry to the meeting, known as the Field of Cloth of Gold, held at Gisnes near Calais. This grand event was more about social competition and showmanship than genuine diplomacy, with the two kings, Henry and Francis, engaging in elaborate displays of wealth and power. Sir Thomas, now in his 40s, likely served as a political advisor rather than participating in the physical contest. During this time, Sir Thomas also pursued his own interests. He had been promised the office of Comptroller of the royal household, but was eventually passed over in favor of Sir Henry Guildford. However, he was later appointed Treasurer of the royal household in 1522. He also continued to negotiate a marriage between his daughter, Anne, and James Butler, a matter that involved complex negotiations with the Irish court. In May 1521, Sir Thomas served on the juries that indicted the Duke of Buckingham for high treason, a routine duty for a trusted courtier. Later that year, he was sent on a mission to the emperor to prepare for Wolsey's trip to Bruges. He stayed to participate in discussions that committed Henry to war with France in 1522. However, due to financial constraints and Scottish unrest, the war preparations were delayed. In May 1522, the emperor visited England, and Sir Thomas was among those who welcomed him. An agreement was signed, delaying the English campaign until 1523. In August, Sir Thomas followed the emperor back to the continent to maintain good relations while Henry dealt with financial issues. The situation was further complicated by the breakdown in relations between Francis I and the Duke of Bourbon, who sought an alliance with the Anglo-imperial powers. However, the lack of funds prevented any meaningful support from being provided. In March 1523, Sir Thomas and Richard Sampson were sent to Spain, but Sir Thomas was recalled in May. By this time, the Duke of Suffolk had led an English army to the continent, but the expected support from the Emperor and Bourbon never materialized. The harsh winter conditions and lack of coordination led to the army's retreat, and the campaign was a failure. Henry was disappointed, but did not blame the Duke. The Emperor, however, became a source of frustration, and relations between the allies deteriorated. Despite the setbacks, Henry remained optimistic, planning a new campaign and even considering leading an army to France himself. However, the lack of funds and the failure to secure a double subsidy from Parliament meant that these plans never came to fruition. As 1524 wore on, the possibility of peace with France began to be discussed, and the focus shifted away from military action. Sir Thomas Boleyn, despite the mysterious incident with Boleyn, the Spanish envoy, continued to rise in the king's favor. This was evident when he received a generous sum of £100 and the lands of Anne Tempest, whose wardship he had been granted. By 1524, he was one of the wealthiest men in the kingdom, assessed at £1,100 for the subsidy, a figure that placed him among the major nobility. In December 1524, he was appointed to the Commission of the Peace for Sussex, a sign of his growing influence and landed interests. Henry VIII, despite his repeated failures and financial struggles, remained determined to achieve military glory. When Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, won a decisive victory at Pavia in 1525 and captured the French King Francis, Henry saw an opportunity to revive his own ambitions. He envisioned a grand alliance with Charles to partition France, with Henry claiming the French throne. However, Charles was uninterested in Henry's grand plans and focused on securing a favorable treaty from his captive. Frustrated, Henry turned to peace negotiations with France, a move that was welcomed by the Regency government led by the Queen Mother. The Treaty of the Moor, signed in August 1525, marked a significant shift in England's foreign policy, and Sir Thomas Boleyn was among the signatories. The Amicable Grant, a tax levy proposed by Wolsey in 1525, proved to be a disaster. Many of those assessed for the grant claimed they could not afford to pay, leading to widespread protests and even violence. Sir Thomas, as a commissioner tasked with collecting the grant in Kent, faced rough treatment from an assembly in Maidstone. The king, recognizing the depth of the resistance, ultimately cancelled the grant. This event highlighted the limitations of the king's power, especially when it came to raising funds from the commons. In the midst of these challenges, Henry turned his attention to the succession. Frustrated by his lack of a male heir, he began to consider his options. One possibility was legitimizing his son, Henry Fitzroy, who was created Duke of Richmond and Somerset in a grand ceremony. Other nobles, including Thomas Boleyn, were also elevated, with Boleyn becoming Viscount Rochford. These promotions were not just about honor, but also about addressing the succession dilemma. Boleyn's rise was a testament to his years of loyal service and his effectiveness in diplomacy and administration. Mary Boleyn, the eldest of Sir Thomas's 3 children, was born around 1499. She was likely born at Hever Castle in Kent. At about 15, she secured a place among the ladies accompanying the king's sister, Mary, to France. However, the death of King Louis XII shortly after the marriage left the young Mary Boleyn and the Queen of France vulnerable. The Queen quickly married Charles Brandon, the Duke of Suffolk, an act that initially angered King Henry but was eventually accepted. Mary Boleyn, who may have witnessed the sexual politics of the French court, returned to England with a reputation that would soon bring her to the king's attention. Sir Thomas Boleyn's career and the lives of his children, Mary and Anne, were deeply intertwined with the whims and ambitions of King Henry VIII. His ability to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics and his loyalty to the king ensured his continued rise, even in the face of challenges and setbacks. The Boleyn family's story is a testament to the complex and often dangerous world of Tudor England, where favor could be fleeting, and survival depended on a delicate balance of power and influence.